Children, you get to stay in here with us today because it's the first Sunday of the month. We've been working our way through the book of Nehemiah. The wall is completed as of today, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we got 3 more messages that will follow. I got some statistics for you. A few of them are pretty easy ones. The first one is this: 56 days. That is the time we have between Halloween and Christmas. How many would say that time frame goes very fast? Just raise your hands, all right? Thanksgiving to Christmas goes exceedingly fast, but 56 days, what it is, from October the 31st till December the 25th. And if you're like me, once November hits, it's like we're already in the new year. It goes so quick. There's so much that happens in a very short time. But if you're planning a big remodel project, can I encourage you, don't choose that time frame. We've done that once before. It worked because I wasn't doing the work. But that is a hard time to get anything really moving and accomplished. And even that, 56 days is a short amount of time. As we're going to look at the passage today, in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15 says this: "So the wall was finished in 52 days." According to archaeology, the width of that wall was about 2.5 meters. It's what's been uncovered. So 2.5 meters, for those of you who can do the conversion, you've got it already. About 7.5, 8 foot, somewhere in there, is how wide this wall would have been. In fact, a section of wall that they have found in archaeology shows that it was very sturdy, but it also shows the signs of something put together. Hastily may not be the right word, but it's like function over form was key. Let's get it done quick. There's some discussion on how much of the wall existed at that time. As you know, the wall kind of changed in different periods during Jerusalem and Israel's history. But 2.5 miles is kind of the figure that is put out there. So 2.5 miles of about 8 foot wide walls accomplished in 52 days by a group of people that maybe at most numbered 50,000. And that might even be a stretch. An incredible task was completed. We're going to see through this that the glory goes to God because that's the one who empowered this. It would not have happened without God being at the helm. And the nations around noticed that as well. But as we go into finishing the jobs, I've entitled this one, we're going to look at 3 points, but really we're going to look at 2 points. The third one is kind of a throw in there. It's going to be very short. But as we look at Nehemiah chapter 6 and 7, what I want to notice is the goodness and the greatness of God and how He uses us. And the 3 points we're going to have to deal with, what does it mean to finish the job? So let's turn to Nehemiah chapter 6. We'll begin reading in verse 15, and we'll read through chapter 7, verse 4, and that'll give us the bulk of our text this morning. All right, some of you beat me to the passage. I'm there now. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15 says this: "So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God." The message is not around that verse, but that verse should be central to the entire passages that we've looked at, the entire book of Nehemiah. Because of the great work that God did in the days of Nehemiah, the nations around said, "What can we do?" We tried to make them fearful, but now that the wall is completed, they became fearful. They became low in their own esteem of self, which they should have, because they saw the greatness and the power of God. And I want to remind you, as you look through the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah is not primarily a story of Nehemiah and the builders and this great work they did. But the book of Nehemiah does not happen as we read it without Nehemiah and the great work that he and the people did. There's this thing called the divine human cooperative you might hear. I'm going to be careful how far I push this, but one thing we see throughout Scripture, that Jesus, that God works in and through people. And he didn't stop doing that in the days of Nehemiah. He does it today. When he calls us to go and make disciples, he doesn't do it by sending angels that do the message on our behalf. He does it through us being his messengers. And when we work on his behalf, we are empowered by him, and God does great and mighty things, and the world takes notice. It reminds me of the New Testament, where up in Antioch, they were first called Christians. The term that most of us hold dear, Christian, didn't come from other believers. It came from the outside world saying, these are Christians. These are apprentices of Jesus Christ. They are followers of him. And in Nehemiah, we see the nations around become fearful because they see the awesome power of this great God. And it goes on, it says this, moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Erah, and his son Jehohanan had taken the daughter Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, as his wife. Also they spoke of his good deeds in my presence, and reported my words to him, and Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. There is this, Nehemiah once again brings up the struggles he was working through. If you see it right here, they had, if you will, moles in the leadership. Because of family ties, Tobiah had an in to Nehemiah's inner circle. And so what they would do is when they talk to Nehemiah, they talk about all the great things that Tobiah has done. And then when they go back to Tobiah, they tell everything that Nehemiah was doing. They were moles, if you will, trying to work on behalf of Tobiah because they had some, if you will, mixed allegiances. This is not the main part of the message, but just adds to the obstacles that Nehemiah had to work through in the building of this wall. And our first point today is not going to be anything we find in verses 16 and following, but it begins in verse 7. And the first point we're going to look at is this, finishing the job by dealing with the punch list. I put it this way, the job is not finished until the finishing is done. Nehemiah chapter 7 verse 1 says this, now when the wall had been built, and I'd set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah the governor of the castle charge over Jerusalem. In verse 3 it talks about Hanani and Hananiah. You can read in some commentaries. Hananiah is actually a shortened form of Hananiah. It looks to me like if you were doing it in English, you put a comma, Hanani, comma, formal name Hananiah, who is the governor of the castle. So I believe those two names you see, they're not two individuals, but one individual. There's discrepancies between different commentators. That's where I fall. I believe we're talking about the same person. And I believe the reason we see that is, look what it says after this, for he, singular. And who's the he? There's no way to trace that antecedent back up to Hanani or Hananiah very easily. So it looks like that's the same person. For he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. Verse 2 we're going to come back to and deal with in one point isolated. But remember Hanani. He is the brother of Nehemiah. We first encounter him in chapter 1, verse 2. He's the one who brought the report to Nehemiah, if you will. He's the one that got the ball rolling on this whole project. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. In those days, it was typical to open the doors in the early morning. He says, wait till the sun is high, wait till it's hot. And I believe the reason for that, it added more security. Typically, in the Near East, they were very aware of the temperature, kind of like we are right now. This evening, I'm hoping to have the belts over if their schedule allows. And I told my wife last night, it'd be fun to do. It'd be fun to play pickleball. And I remembered the heat of today, of yesterday and the day before, and I go, no, let's play board games inside. Because what tonight is going to be is probably another sweat fest. Just hot. In the Near East, it's always just hot during certain times of the year. And so they were very aware of the heat. And so by opening the doors a little bit later, when the sun is high, it would keep those who might try to come in and attack and pillage, it might keep them out because they don't want to go out during the middle of the day. And while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. The first point we're going to look at today is the job is not finished until the finishing is done. Did you know that 42% of to-do list items are never completed? 80% of New Year's resolutions are abandoned by February. 73% of people start tasks but never finish the... I got that one from ChatGPT. So I've got something for you guys to engage you a little bit. So this is just for couples, all right? So couples, please engage here. So there are generally two types of people when it comes to finishing jobs. There are those that say 80% is good enough, and the last 20%, which takes so long, can just kind of sit for a while. People like that typically will have not just one task they're working on, but 2, 3, 4, or 5. If you walk into their house, walk into their shop, you will find tasks that are almost done. The garage door goes up and down, but if you will, the painting around the trim is not done. You walk in, the doors open and close, but they may be different colors. You will find function over form. You'll also typically find during different seasons their tools will not look like Brent's place, but they'll be scattered where you last used them. I won't tell you what kind of person I am, but I'll tell you this, that sometimes I spend more time looking for tools than I do using tools. Daniel can vouch for that when we were changing brakes last week. We looked for probably 30 minutes for a C-clamp that has a place on my pegboard, but it was not there. But we found it where everybody should expect to find it, in my sink. So I don't understand all that, but so here we go. So spouses, husbands and wives, if you are a person who, unlike the 80%er, you're more the person, the job is not done until everything is cleaned up and put away and finished. The idea of having an unfinished task for weeks on end is hard for you to comprehend because the job, Flo Hour, I knew you'd be shaking your head back there. The job is not done until everything is done, the tools are put away, and a system for keeping this thing the way it is also at least in the works. So I'm going to make the 80%ers. You're going to be the standard. If you're an 80%er, 80%ers, if you would, stand with me. I'm already standing. So if you're an 80%er in your family, go and stand with me. Some of you are married to 80%ers. As an 80%er, that is actually a good thing, but you'll notice when you walk into their houses, all right? So some 80%ers. All right. Okay. So guys, you'll notice there's some spouses sitting down. Entire couples. All right. This group right here, we need to get them working on stuff at church, all right? So you 80%ers who are standing, thank you for being honest, and I believe we get more accomplished in this life, and we have a happier time as we go through it because we can handle a little bit of chaos. So 80%, give them a round of applause. Or don't sit yet. Those of you who are married to an 80%er but are not an 80%er, can we pray for them? Their life is exceedingly difficult as they try to figure out how do I manage the 80%. 80%, you can sit back down now. So statistically in this church, we are out of balance because it says, according to statistics, more of you are 80%ers. So some of you are either liars or don't like standing, or you think more highly of yourself than what you should. According to statistics, but statistics can lie. Nehemiah chapter 7, those 4 verses we just read, I believe show us, if you will, Nehemiah knocking out the punch list. I remember when we moved here 20 years ago, we ended up building a home, and when that home was near completion, there was what was called a punch list. So we walked through the house, and we pointed out all those things they needed to finish up. That punch list was great for us because we didn't have to do them. It was probably not great for the builder because they get 99% of the work done, and now that 1% is going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 days for them to complete. What was Nehemiah's punch list? I just put a short list of his punch list. One was complete the wall, including doors, gaps, and cracks. You see in chapter 6, verse 1, it says this. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and there's no breach left in it, okay, so he's almost there. The wall's built. There's no more breaches. Watch what it says this. Although up to that time I had not set up the doors in the gates. I almost envisioned with Nehemiah, he had this list going on. All the things that need to be accomplished, he's check, check, check. All right, almost. And he had to finish not just the walls, not just the gaps being filled, but he now had to set the doors. And in verse 15 it says that no, sorry, not 15. In 7 verse 1, it says that he sets up the doors. Then he has to set up ongoing wall security. Why did he have to do that? Verses 16 through 19 says, Tobiah was still trying to cause troubles. Tobiah was still trying to stir up, if you will, the officials against this task. They still had enemies. Even though the wall was built, even though the enemies all around had lost heart to some degree, there was still this constant sense, this constant reality that at any point our enemies could take up arms and try to attack. And so what does he do? It says that he put up those in charge of the doors. He appointed guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He put them at guard posts and some in front of their own homes. You see that throughout the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah puts people in places where their family will be impacted. If you build the wall in front of your house, you're likely to build that wall very well because you don't want to be the place of the enemy's breach and for your family to be the first one that's taken out. He puts them in charge of, if you will, the wall and who is going to guard it. He changes the times of the opening and closing of the doors. He does all of these things because finishing the wall didn't mean the job was finished. I'm an 80%er, which means that I love vision. I love getting jobs started, but I know my own propensity to start a job, get it to good enough, and I'm on to the next thing. For those who have been with me for as long as you have, thank you for your patience. Because I know there's been a lot of 80% jobs where someone else to come up and finish it. For instance, this last week, this is not my job, but if you've noticed, we have some bulbs in our church that sometimes like to come on, sometimes don't like to. If you work in the office, you see them. The nursery's had them for a while. The bathrooms have had them for a little bit. The ballast doesn't work. Anybody had bad ballast in your house? All right, most of you don't have ballast anymore. They're the worst, right? So this last week, John Paul said, hey, I'm going to start taking care of those lights. For the first time since I've been here, when I turn on the light in my office, it is consistently bright. It is an amazing thing. And I don't have to bring a flashlight in my office anymore. It's great. For those who work in the nursery today, or work in the nursery, you'll notice when you turn on that light, it's like, oh, you can see everything now. So we got to make sure we get it nice and clean, right? So the lights are on. And here's one of the cool things. So this last week, as John Paul's working on, he was going to leave before one of the ballasts were done. And I know what you're thinking, like, John Paul, how dare you? But he goes, you know what, I'm going to stick around and finish this last one off. One of the ballasts in the office, it had, for some reason, heated up the room to the point where he was like, it's hot in here. When he pulled off the, whatever that is, the ballast was literally dripping. So, God used John Paul, there he is, finishing a job to keep our church from burning down. So if you're grateful we don't have a burnt down church, thank John Paul. We really appreciate how God works through the normal stuff of life. I share that because that is one of those, if you will, punch list items in the church. Sometimes punch list items are in the form of ministries that are almost completed, but we have a few gaps. It could be facilities. So you say, these are things that are almost done, but not quite. And we're full of a church of individuals like John Paul and like Sandy, like many of you, who come in and you see the gaps, and you just fill them in. If you will, you're the punch list people. Nehemiah, as the leader of this group, his punch list was, let's get the walls, the doors, and the gates taken care of. We now need to set up security. And then verse 2, he even talks about succession planning. See how he has his brother step up and take charge of being in control of Jerusalem. We're going to come back to that. And then 7 verse 4 gives an interesting observation. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. If you look at Nehemiah 7, verse 5 and following, you'll see a recording that took place when Zerubbabel came back with the Jews that had been in captivity, and he records how many people came back from the different families. And when they came back to Jerusalem, they didn't go to Jerusalem. They went, if you will, to their family farms. They went to the pieces of land that their family had owned for years. So for 14 years, from the time Zerubbabel came back to the time that Nehemiah comes back, for 14 years, they begun working their family ground. That's a good thing. They had began setting up their home and making, if you will, a life for themselves in their land. But because the walls in Jerusalem had been broken down for so long, people did not live in the city. And that posed a real problem. We got a wall, we got gates, we got those that work in the temple that live in the city, but outside of that, it was sparse. That makes Jerusalem, even with its newly finished walls, vulnerable. And Nehemiah recognized this. So part of the finishing the job wasn't just to make sure the wall was intact, not just make sure the gates had been guarded, not just setting up a new leader, but it was the task of how do we fill the city? We see that the answer to that comes in chapter 11, verse 1. It says this, "Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 remained in the other towns." So they had, if you will, a draft. If your name was chosen, then you were called to live in Jerusalem. And look what it says in verse 2. "And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem." The book of Nehemiah is an incredible story of how God did a great work through Nehemiah and the people. And you get now here to the end, it's like we got to finish these last little things. And the people who had a mind to work 52 days earlier had a mind to finish and complete the task. I think there's some good lessons there for us as well as a church. There are things within our facilities that we probably need to button up. Our next deacons meeting, we'll be talking through our discipleship pathways, working through our core values and processes so that how do we serve this church better by not having, if you will, a whole bunch of stuff that we offer, but how do we help people get involved in ministry? How do we actually make disciples, not just talk about it? How do we do this in a way that is both systematized and is also personal? And we see that with Nehemiah. Spiritual work is also done through the systems, the processes, the people. As a church, we want to be about the mission of making disciples that make more disciples. As we put it, preparing lives committed to Christ for today, tomorrow, and eternity. And did you know that it is a spiritual thing as a church to think through our processes, to think through our facilities, to think through how do we help move a person in their walk with Jesus Christ. We see in Nehemiah the spiritual work of building the wall was also building the people, was finishing the task. The next thing we see there is not just the punch list. The job is not finished until the finishing is done. But the next one says passing the torch. So we'll look back at Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 2, and watch what Nehemiah does with his brother. "I gave my brother Hanani," remember we saw him in chapter 1, verse 2. He's the brother who told Nehemiah about the condition of the walls. "The governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many." Verse 2 brings out 2 very important words. He was faithful. That word in the original language means faithful. He was reliable. He was trustworthy. There's a quote by John Wesley. A lady once asked John Wesley that suppose he were to know that he would die at 12 o'clock midnight tomorrow, how would he spend the intervening time? His reply, I love this. "Why, madam, just as I intend to spend it now. I would preach this evening at Gloucester, and again at 5 tomorrow morning. After that, I would ride to Tewkesbury, preach in the afternoon, and meet the societies in the evening. I would then go to Reverend Martin's house, who expects to entertain me, talk and pray with the family as usual, retire to my room at 10 o'clock, commend myself to my Heavenly Father, lie down to rest, and wake up in glory." One of the characteristics of a faithful person is you can trust them. They're going to do today what God called them to do that day, regardless of other things that may call for their attention. They're reliable. I remember growing up, there is a verse that I probably quoted poorly, but it says something like this: "Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is a man who sends a sluggard to do a task." I might change my parenting in the future if I had to do this all over again, because my oldest son, brings this back up. But it was a verse I would quote when I'd send them to do a task and it didn't get completed. Like smoke to the eyes and vinegar to the teeth is a person who sends a sluggard to do a task. And behind that, the reality is It is so bothersome when you ask them to do a task and they what? They fail to get it done. Nehemiah describes his brother as a person who was faithful. You could count on him. Not only was he faithful, he feared God. I like what it says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 about Noah. It says, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household. When Noah built the ark, it says he was moved by godly fear. Do you know one of the great things that God has built into us is fear? And God intends to use that fear, that awe, that reverence, that knowing that He is in control of everything to motivate us to action to serve Him, even when it's not convenient, even when it's a little bit scary, even when it doesn't fit with your schedule. Godly fear is meant to motivate us to serve Him well. Nehemiah says of his brother Hanani, he says, this man is reliable. This man fears God. In the book of 2 Timothy, chapter 2, verse 2, we see a verse that's a favorite of ours here at the church. It says, well, you've heard from me among many witnesses, what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. One of the things that we see in the book of Nehemiah is Nehemiah realized once the task was done, he needed to pass the torch. One of the things that we want to be doing as a ministry is raising up godly leaders, men and women, who will be able to continue to move this ministry forward. Raising up godly men for deacons and pastors. Raising up godly individuals for the other ministries that exist in this church so that when God calls us home or calls us away, there's someone who's filling the gap. One of the great things that we've seen in this church, I believe, is a raising up of individuals for the work of ministry. If I were to croak today in the pulpit, next week there'd be 5, 6, 7, 8 guys who I believe could fill this spot, could preach and could lead this church well, because as a church, you've taken seriously the task of on their last pastor and don't even realize it. When their current pastor leaves, that church will cease to have a pastor unless God intervenes in I don't want to say miraculous way, but unless God intervenes. Because there are less and less men being prepared for ministry, and there's a shortage of pastors. Guys, I'd like for us to be a part of the solution to that problem. Teenagers, man, I would love for you to be thinking and praying, does God have something for your life that involves ministry, pastoral missionaries? Those are your 20s, 30s, and 40s, 50s. We'll go into the 60s, but not much further. Maybe God's calling you to a second career. It's said right now that most of the missionaries that are new candidates are in their 40s or 50s right now. It's, if you will, second career missionaries. Right now, the average age of a pastor in the United States is 57. Run those numbers out. It doesn't take long for that 57 becomes 70, 75, and those men need to retire. One of the beauties that we see in Nehemiah is before Nehemiah aged out, if you will, he passed the torch to the next guy.